And although, Alec, I admit to you that this is, by all reasonable estimations, a hospital pass, given the political conditions, the complexity of the coalition, the financial position of the city, the findings of the AHE, it's going to be extremely difficult exercise. It is also something that a young, idealistic, and perhaps sometimes a bit naive person would want to undertake, to say this is a project to show that we can make coalitions work where the conditions are right. And if we can make the capital city work, hell, then maybe we can make South Africa work after 2024 in Gauteng and maybe even Parliament.
Well, for people who've been following the coalition governments in Gauteng, it's been a roller coaster ride, but just imagine what's been going on for those who are in the middle of the action. Today we talk with Cilliers Brink, reappointed mayor of Tshwane after, well, we'll find out what's been going on there. Is that a bit inaccurate, Cilliers? Is this the first time you've been the mayor of Tshwane, or
this is the first time?
The first time.
Yeah.
It's not the first time the DA has been in the hot seat, though.
No. Our coalition is basically coming back with some fresh faces.
Let's just go back a little into your own background. You look fairly young.
Yes, I'm 35. I studied law at the University of Pretoria. That's where I became involved in politics. In 2011, I was elected as a councillor in Tshwane, so I've had a previous stint as a councillor. I did my articles, I got involved with a business of my own. But in 2016, when Solim Samanga became basically the first DA mayor of Tshwane, I served on his MACO in the corporate services portfolio. And in 2019, I went to Parliament, where I served on the local government committee, COGTA. So I'm quite young, that's right. I think you need all of the energy and perhaps the naive idealism that you can muster in order to take on this job. But I have been in politics quite a bit, and most of that time has been focused on local government.
We have seen, as members of the public, great successes achieved by peers, I guess you could call them, Geordin Hill-Lewis in Cape Town, and Chris Pappas in the uMngeni municipality in KZN. What is it about the Democratic Alliance that they're attracting people like you to these kind of public service roles?
So let me just say something about the successes in Cape Town in particular. And of course, Alec, Cape Town is our shining city on a hill. We draw inspiration from them. But it's also quite tricky to compare us to Cape Town because Geordin Hill-Lewis is an excellent mayor, excellent politician, understands the issues, understands the job, but he has the benefit also of a decade and a half of DA government, and that's majority DA government. Helen Zille, of course, made a success of the fairly chaotic coalition back then, but I think what happened is she built a government at a critical time where the cadre deployment in the city of Cape Town was certainly prevalent, but it had not established itself as a governing norm to the extent that it has now done in the Gauteng municipalities. So I'm certainly not saying that Helen had it easier. I think she just had a more opportune time. And the benefits of that are being enjoyed by Geordin Hill-Lewis, although let me absolutely emphasize that he is a top-class politician. And we are really fortunate as a public to have Geordin Hill-Lewis serving us. What attracts us to the DA? I think, what has always set the DA apart is we've got a clear philosophy. Not everyone might appreciate that philosophy, but that philosophy is as a coherence. It's got a history. We believe in the individual, the freedom and the autonomy of the individual. We believe that only free individuals can build a successful society. And aside from having our affairs as a party in order, our organization, our discipline, and so on, the ability to hold elective congresses, the one distinguishing feature has always been a coherent world view. And I think that's when you attract people who have a more intellectual approach. Of course, the DA also has the DA Young Leaders Program, a specific initiative designed to identify and cultivate young political leaders, both Geordin and I went through the Young Leaders Program, Chris Pappas as well. I'm not saying that made the decisive difference, but there is very much a focus on developing young political leadership, but also having a coherent worldview that we can apply and try to make order out of the chaos that is governance and politics in South Africa.
Well, tell us about the chaos that's been going on in Tshwane. For those of us on the outside, these daily headlines have been staggering and almost unbelievable at times. Go back to the 2021 November elections, the result thereof, and if you would, just bring us up to date.
Yeah, so if you would, I want to go back to 2016, the first time that the ANC was deposed in these metros, Joburg, Tshwane, and Nelson Mandela Bay. The problem was that in Joburg and Tshwane, the coalitions didn't have a clear majority. So holding a coalition together is a challenge in and of itself. If your coalition doesn't have a majority, and if you have to negotiate with, for instance, the EFF to have your budgets passed, that is an absolute disastrous situation. And hoping to achieve rapid and clear progress under those circumstances is very difficult. The benefit of 2021, Alec, is that our coalition, the parties that are working in the multi-party coalition, DA, Action SA, Freedom Front Plus, ACDP, IFP, and back then it was still COPE. Those parties had a majority, and even without COPE, we still have a majority. But unfortunately, earlier this year, well, last month, it feels like months, but it's in fact just been a month. Some of the councillors who are in our coalition, count among what I call our majority, clearly voted for the COPE candidate, effectively the ANC EFF puppet candidate for mayor of Tshwane, Murunwa Makwarela. There was an agonizing process by the parties in the coalition to identify these individuals. Action SA has subsequently fired 3 of their councillors, and it's emerged that another councillor of theirs was offered 2 million rand, which to his credit, he rejected. And the police is now investigating that case. So it's clear that in Tshwane, the ANC EFF coalition depended on secret crossovers. I won't call them traitors because that's a bit of an emotive tag. Crossovers to do what they want to do, whether it is to form a new government, a puppet mayor, or simply to create the conditions to place Tshwane under administration. Finally, we have defeated those attempts, but there is a lot of work that lies ahead.
So you've had the election, you've got everyone on side, there's nobody who's being bribed now by the other side, if you call it that, and it's full steam ahead. You've been appointed as mayor. What made you put your hand up for the job?
So I am a resident of Pretoria. I love this city. I understand local government. And although, Alec, I admit to you that this is, by all reasonable estimations, a hospital pass, given the political conditions, the complexity of the coalition, the financial position of the city, the findings of the AHE, it's going to be extremely difficult exercise. It is also something that a young, idealistic, and perhaps sometimes a bit naive person would want to undertake, to say this is a project to show that we can make coalitions work where the conditions are right. And if we can make the capital city work, hell, then maybe we can make South Africa work after 2024 in Gauteng and maybe even Parliament.
Well, it's a lot on your young shoulders with that kind of ideal, and certainly people outside of Tshwane will be watching you very carefully, particularly because of the recent history. Frans Cronje was in an interview that I had with him last week saying that the support for the Rainbow Coalition, as many people are now calling it, the DA-led grouping, is very much waning, and that the ANC slide has stopped because, to a large degree, what went on in Tshwane. He cited the opportunity missed with 2 power stations that Tshwane could have picked up and run with, and the poor budget, or the poor budgeting, which he said was reminiscent of what one would find in the worst parts of the Eastern Cape ANC-led areas. How do you respond to those types of criticisms? Is he exaggerating for effect?
I watched that interview, and I spoke to Frans afterwards to understand his analysis also of the situation at Eskom. But he's quite right. Coalitions are extremely complicated. Alec, we mustn't romanticize coalitions. We can do our best to make a success of coalitions, but the example of the power stations is where there was a failure to agree on the side of the coalition. Now, Randall Williams, who was the mayor then, came with a proposal to use the coal-fired power stations in Pretoria that have fallen into disuse in the past 10 years, Pretoria West and Rooiwal. And one of the coalition partners objected to the way that happened. And so maybe that could have been handled differently. And hopefully now we can put out a request for proposals and see how we can use the market in order to use these assets of the city to become more independent of Eskom. But the point is that was a failure in terms of coalition management and coalition agreement. And I'm not going to claim that I will be brilliant at this. Coalitions are inherently unstable and complicated. And so we have to learn from our mistakes and try to do better. But Frans is quite right in the sense that the ANC wants to point to these cities. In fact, they actively want to sabotage these cities, and there's no doubt in my mind. I don't want to overemphasize this point, but there are still deployed cadres who work in these municipalities, and they aren't independent apolitical civil servants. They are political agents, and they are doing their best to make us fail. But at the same time, there's also majority of municipal officials who are willing to serve the government of the day. But indeed, we have to take that criticism very seriously, Alec, and get our house in order, make sure that there's proper agreement when we put good policy solutions on the table. The upside of Tshwane, compared to Joburg and Ekurhuleni, is that in Tshwane, we have a majority. We've got 50% plus one of the seats, and without that, you can't appoint a good city manager, you can't discipline poor performing officials, you can't pass a budget, you can't pass a bylaw. So that we have in place, that came under challenge. I think we've got our house in order now, but it doesn't mean that we're out of the woods. We're still in a very complicated situation where there's, for example, an ANC EFF speaker, and that person can abuse his power to disrupt things, to prevent us from passing an adjustments budget, from putting a budget for next year on the table. And the risk there is, of course, that creates the conditions for Tshwane to be placed under administration by the ANC Gauteng government, which has happened before, and it had a disastrous effect on the city. In fact, many of the problems that we now have, the controls that have broken down, the institutional issues, the dip in revenue collection can be traced back to those 7 months in 2020 during the COVID lockdown, when the ANC Gauteng government placed Tshwane under administration.
These are extremely difficult times for politicians trying to do the right thing, as we saw also what happened in Cape Town, as you go back to the coalitions in that town. And I'm sure that your colleague in Nelson Mandela Bay can swap notes with you on how difficult it is managing coalitions. But that second point that Frans Cronje made about the DA-run council's budget being likened to the worst of what was seen in the Eastern Cape under the ANC. Now, that's a perception he has, and surely many others would as well. And I get back to that part. What actually went on there, and how is it going to be different with you as mayor?
So it would seem that the CFO, who is principally responsible for putting the financial statements together, in fact, failed to collect evidence for the claims that were made in the financial statements. I'm not saying that it's fraudulent, because that would be a very serious allegation. But as they were preparing to submit these statements to the Auditor General for scrutiny, it became apparent that many of the statements that were made there were baseless. There was no proper control of assets, and to a large extent, your political leadership does exercise oversight over the compilation of financial statements. I mean, that's the point. That's the adverse audit, is the Auditor General said, what you claim to be your balance sheet, your income statement, your property, plant and equipment, I cannot find sufficient detail to actually put my stamp on that. And while politicians have oversight over that, and we've got to be careful to say that we must exercise that oversight. We can't just stand back and let the officials do all of the work. They do depend on the advice of officials. And I think an important point is the CFO has been fired. I would like to see other people taking responsibility for this situation, because it's not just a mere oversight. It would seem that there were active misstatements in the compilation of the financial statements. But it's also clear from the AG report that certain things have simply never been established in Tshwane. Certain financial controls. He also cites the data environment. Now, if you don't have proper data, you can't have proper performance management. You can't have sound decisions. And maybe we can admit, Alec, that way back we should have been far more aggressive in getting rid of non-performing officials, or officials who indicated that they were politically hostile towards the DA and the coalition administration. And now those difficult decisions will need to be made. It's a matter of necessity, even beyond the Auditor General report. The big issue in Tshwane is that our expenses exceed our income. The city has a very poor credit rating. We cannot finance our shortfall in the capital or the operational side because of that poor credit rating. All of the cities, by the way, have been downgraded, but Tshwane has been downgraded more because there have been these systemic financial issues. And we have to get in there and make the tough decisions, reverse some of the damage, and convey a sense of confidence and trust. The one upside in this, Alec, is that we have, for the first time in Tshwane, in my memory, a competent apolitical city manager by the name of uMngeni. Now, if you've read the book, How to Steal a City, you'd know that Metler was sent in by National Treasury to help fix Nelson Mandela Bay. He was reappointed by Athol Trollip, and he did an excellent job until a shaky coalition brought down the entire government as well as a competent official. We've managed to recruit him in Tshwane. Joburg failed the opportunity of recruiting him because of coalition issues again. But he's here, and that's very important, because without a competent apolitical top official who's willing to implement the manifesto of the coalition, we'll see the failures of the past repeating themselves.
It's a huge enterprise, the city of Tshwane. The budget runs into tens, hundreds of billions of rand. And I guess it's like a corporation. If you haven't got the right chief executive and the right CFO, the chief financial officer, you are heading for an iceberg. So having put the management in place, as you've explained to us now, will presumably mean that into the future, you'll avoid the problems that you've hit thus far. But is it going to be soon enough for the big day, which is only 12, maybe 13 months away, when the country goes to the polls for the national elections, to get a new provincial government, presumably, and also and whether or not they're going to have a new national government? What can you do between now and then to help the people of Tshwane to see that you are able to make a difference?
I think it's going to be very difficult to have compelling results in such a short period of time. That's the unfortunate part. But I do think if we're honest with people, if we say this is what we found, this is what we're doing about the situation, if we can show that we can hold this coalition together, which is not a given, even though we have a majority. You know, when folks start arguing about jobs and we want this Mako seat and that Mako seat, as happened in Joburg, then, all bets are off. So, Alec, the only thing we can do is to promise toil, sweat, blood, tears, and hard work, and to show unity of purpose in the coalition, which I think failed. We failed at that attempt in the past. And when I say we, I mean all of us in the coalition. If we can do that, if we can convey some progress, even though we might not have by next year's election the excellent shining city on a hill that we have in Cape Town, at least we can show people that we're getting there. We can, in fact, work with each other. we do offer a compelling alternative. And by the way, if the ANC and the EFF were in control of this city, there would simply be nothing left. And I'm very serious. That's not just rhetoric. There is a reason why they are so eager to get control of these metros in the run-up to the election. And if you watch the Zondo Commission, you would have a hint that it's got something to do with financing election campaigns.
Cilliers Brink is the new executive mayor of Tshwane, and I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.